All right. Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon, I should say. It's noon. So good afternoon. Welcome to the second GeekEd panel, The Marvels. I do apologize if there's a little Ewok running around. He's not really dressed as an Ewok. That's my son that you hear running around in the background. He's 2.5. So GeekEd has been around since 2011. So we are a group of higher education professionals, mostly student affairs folks, student life folks who work at different universities who've been infusing geek culture into the work that we do. So this afternoon, our panel, The Marvels, is about being women leaders in a higher education setting. And I just want to say I am so happy and proud to be here. My name is Dr. Emily Sandoval. I serve as the Associate Vice Provost for Student Affairs at the University of Southern California. And I am one of the original GeekEd folks, so since 2011. And our very first panel, my colleague Alex will introduce herself shortly. We had 2 high school women come up to us and look at us in awe. They're like, "You're geeks." Yeah. They're like, "And you're women." Yes. So when I think about 2011 to now, and I'm honored to be on this panel with all these brilliant women, it's just amazing. And one last plug, within this week, after, 12 years, we will be launching the geekedcollective.com. So finally have a website to unify all of us, where we could uplift and amplify the work that we do at our respective colleges. So enough of me talking. I'd like my panel to please introduce themselves, your name, where you work, what your position is, your pronouns, and add what non-male or non-human superhero do you draw inspiration from? Alex, starting with you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Belisario. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director for College Student Life at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and really excited to be here with you all today. In terms of non-male or non-human superheroes, I have always been a fan of sort of the background superheroes. So like Secret Agent P from Phineas and Ferb, the aliens in Toy Story, those are the Minions, those are usually the ones, Grogu. Those are the ones who talk to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Geralyn Williams. I use she, her, and queen as my pronouns. I am the Assistant Director for Student Engagement and Leadership at the Pace Center for Civic Engagement at Princeton University. And one character that has been sticking with me particularly lately, is from this latest season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And we're introduced to an amazing activist lawyer. I want to say it's Nita Karul, and she's played by the amazing Atida Badaki. And when I watched it, I was literally like typing out all of her quips, all of her call outs. And when I think about civic engagement and justice, like that's somebody that stands as a testament.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Sunny Lee. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students at UC Berkeley. This is my first at Comic-Con. It's been a wonder. And first I just want to thank Emily and Al Day for inviting me here, and also my kids, who I probably wouldn't be able to be here or know enough if it wasn't for having a teenager and a preteen. Who've brought me along their journey and interest in these superheroes. Let's see, recently I am drawing inspiration. I'm gonna cheat a little bit because she doesn't have supernatural powers yet, but I am hoping that she will pretty soon or down the line. And that is Katie from Shang-Chi. She is Shang-Chi's best friend, sidekick. I would have loved it if she was the main character and the superheroine. I just love anything that Awkwafina is in. Nora Lum is her non-stage name, but just love her in all her films, and just amazing that she was in this feature superhero Marvel movie, and I can't wait till she gets her own movie.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Martha Enciso. I use she, her, and ella pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs at the Cal State University Fullerton. I want to thank Emily and the crew for the invite as well. I would say some of my non-human, and Emily knows this as a fan, is Goofy. Goofy, I think, as an adult learner, going back to school, with his son Max. I think that's a superhero to be able to come back at a later age and go to college, since there isn't I tell folks there isn't a cap on when you can come back to school and complete a degree. And it hits a little bit close to home for myself because my mother went back to school, and I went to undergrad at the same time as my mother, so I feel very close to Max and Goofy, I would say. But thank you all for being here.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marcelle Hayashida. I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Wellness, Health, and Counseling at University of California at Irvine. I use the she series pronouns. And I think for me, it's Wonder Woman, an old school, the Linda Carter version. I have a picture of me in my living room, my underoos, posing the Wonder Woman. What I didn't realize until a little bit later was that she was created by psychologist William Moulton Marsden, and there's a fantastic book by Jill Lepore all about him and his interesting lifestyle and creation of the Wonder Woman character. And he was an early pioneer of of a polygraph, what ended up becoming the polygraph. And so that's her lasso of truth, is very much about the creator's personal interest in the truth. So I later ended up becoming a psychologist, and I think a lot of what draws me to this character is, how to get the truth out of people.
Awesome, thank you all. And you can probably figure Leia is one of the characters I draw inspiration from. Also, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because I am actually 1 year older than the character of Buffy. And we could also talk about toxic masculinity and having to separate the creator from the creation, because that's happened a lot of fandoms. And we're going to talk about toxic fandom in a little bit. But I want to start off because we are here to talk about representation, both in the geek genre and in our real lived experiences as women leaders in higher education. So can any of you share an example of when you drew inspiration from fandom to tackle an issue or cope with a situation? And I believe Marcelle was going to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I was going to talk about villains in the workplace. I don't know if any of you have any of those. Yeah, okay. Just a few. Now, no one's actually ever tried to murder me, which is awesome yet. But there are people who talk smack behind your back or are trying to kind of thwart your projects or those sorts of things. And it's hard to cope with. And so I think one of the things that I'm drawing inspiration from lately is Wakanda Forever, the movie, in the character of Namor, right? And that the idea is that when you have an adversary, and he's a villain in some ways, when you have an adversary, there's two things to think about. One is, what do you have in common, right? What's the shared goal that you're just trying to go about in different ways? And for him, it's very much about seeing his people subjugated as he's trying to bury his mother, and trying to protect their precious natural resource, which he and the Kingdom of Wakanda both have, right? Vibranium. So he wants to blow up the world, start war with everybody, and she has a different approach. And so that's part of what I try to do in my real life, right? That we've got these very different ways of achieving the same goal. How can we think about how to work together instead of working at cross purposes with each other? And the second thing is really, I think, about understanding the villain, the origin story. The trauma often is driven by some sort of trauma, right? So for him, again, losing his mother and seeing what happened to his people. At work, there's often a villain trauma story as well in their origin story. In my experience, it's been their contract is about to expire, or their funding is about to run out, or they've got some other boss breathing down their neck and they're acting in a particular way to me because of those reasons. And trying to figure out what's their origin story as a villain has often been really helpful to me as I work through kind of conflicts in the workplace. So I'm really kind of driven, drawing some inspiration from Wakanda Forever.
Okay. For me, it's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't know if anyone has seen that. I came to this show, I remember watching Black Panther and was so inspired and just kind of threw it on Facebook. Are there any other movies with representation from, superheroes of color? And somebody said, you should check out Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. There's 2 Asian American women who are leading characters in there. So didn't start until this was 2020, so smack right after the start of COVID and lockdown. And there's lots of seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and so we started watching it as a family. And at first I was like, gosh, my colleague said there's 2 Asian American characters. I only see Ming-Na Wan, who plays the character of Melinda May, which is one of the agents. And then I realized, oh, it's the other main character, Sky, who's played by Chloe Bennett, who's multiracial, biracial. And I started looking her up. And her name is actually Chloe Wing, but there's a story that she wrote about she couldn't get work as Chloe Wing, so she changed her name as Chloe Bennett. Now, she's a young actress in her 20s. I was like, oh my God, this is still going on. And as soon as she changed her name to Bennett, she started getting a lot of work and got cast as Sky in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So what I loved about this show, and there were better seasons than others, it was something to look forward to at the end of the day. I never worked harder than I did during COVID, right? Spending 8 to 10 hours on consecutive Zoom meetings, trying to figure out what is happening. And it was such a release to be able to sit down with the family. And because I'm just sitting in my chair all day, kind of just cathartically, these Asian American women just kicking ass, like just, beating the crap out of villains at the end of the day. But with the Melinda May character in particular, there's a lot going on in her life in terms of the trauma that she experienced and why initially she wasn't fighting anymore, and why the others called her Calvary. And then we learned to learn the backstory later. And as she starts working on confronting that pain and working through her healing, she's able to offer her gifts again to the world. And the reason I, connect with that is, I experienced my own traumatic loss, lost my spouse suddenly a little over 2 years ago. And when I came back to work after taking, 6 to 8 weeks off, I remember the women in the meetings that I was with saying, you know what, you're showing it really differently. I was like, I'm sure. And they said, we like it. You're showing up much more powerfully, and we hope that stays. And that has stuck with me because we know the stages of grief, the linear stages, are not real, right? There's no linear path to grief, but anger is certainly an important component of the process. And I was in acute pain and anger, and I still visit there. Sometimes often, but I didn't have as many filters at that time, right? And so I was just kind of, and just perspective, like I thought something was BS, I was much more likely to call it out, right? And the truth, the truth was just so much more clear. So there was just things that I think I was willing to show up more authentically as myself, because I didn't have the energy to, or the mental or emotional space to keep filtering myself in ways that I had been doing prior to that. Things that I've been working on my whole career, but really, sometimes it takes a traumatic event for some, or an illuminating experience for others to get to that point. And so I would say in my healing process, and I've talked a lot about this with Al, and that's probably what led me to this today, that there's so, once someone experienced that kind of loss and trauma, that's the new lens to the world. And I didn't realize how much that is reflected in comics and Marvel and stories. And I was talking about it to the kids, and they're like, Mom, that's the foundation of every Disney movie, haven't you noticed? It starts with somebody losing a parent, and I was like, I never saw it that way before, because I had the privilege of not to. So anyway, I draw inspiration from Melinda May, but really any character, and I think it's very universal, who've confronted their trauma, their pain, working through their healing, and able to emerge transformed.
Thank you both. And ironically, those Disney movies, the old school Disney, was always the women that were killed off in the beginning. But let's talk about showing up as our authentic selves and sometimes calling out the BS. We are in a unique moment in time, maybe not, because this is all cyclical, where we're seeing legislation at the federal level attack us as women, Multiple identities are being attacked, and it's most definitely affecting our community of students at our universities. So what recent fandoms or works are preparing us for this moment as we support our students in tackling social issues?
So I think that's one that I'll start off with. And I think there's a lot of really awesome fandom out there that is talking about the history and the culture and the cyclical nature of, what we're going through. In thinking about how I engage with my students and helping them, understand the world around them, I do say Princeton makes itself a bubble because it has lots of resources. And that can kind of just be the place that our students sit. But when we want to challenge them and train them up to be critical thinkers, to be leaders in our community, we have to do it in careful ways, because we really care about people doing no harm, engaging in community safely, and not putting their foot in their mouths. And there can be a lot of pain in connecting with community and asking communities to tell their stories. And so when we are working to try to engage our students and to offer them perspectives and help them do their own work, I find that, television and documentaries and other kinds of things can help bring them in, make things more accessible, but still call things out. I would say this is not necessarily quite fandom, but it can kind of get there. It's if anybody ever watched the Z-Way show on Showtime, she did really great, fun parodies of pop culture and things like that. And she did a whole little clip talking about all of these movies and television shows that glorify black pain. And it's literally, the clip is called Black Pain. And it's being satirical, but it's real. It's calling out all these movies like Green Book and Hidden Figures, in these moments where black pain is valorized and said to be learned from. And so I use it to talk to students about their perspectives, about understanding other people's lived experiences in ways that doesn't cause harm to community. And so some of these other things that we've been pulling in is really thinking about, where are the spaces that are teaching our students how to engage. I think we have a lot of focus sometimes on a very binary space about how we show up to, moments of struggle, of social unrest. And sometimes it can be very clearly, particular kinds of protest, or kind of getting involved in the electoral politics, which are both awesome ways to engage. But there's so much more out there, and there's so much more for folks to get involved in. And so when I think about books by Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower, and that entire trilogy is amazing. And I've used it to work with students on racial justice internships. You have spaces that have been created in a lot of animated work, where there's space for care and understanding grief and relationships and power. I love Steven Universe, and people might think it's something that's a little more kiddie, but there's so much there, and you can use it with young kids. You can use it all the way up through college, and it's just these spaces where you can imagine who you want to be and transform into who you want to be, and have space to work through, the stuff that people are going through. I think particularly Steven Universe is something that I use a lot with students that are part of the LGBTQ community. There's just so much happening for our queer communities, but particularly our non-binary and trans students. And it can be really hard and daunting to have to navigate these university systems, some that are supportive, some that aren't, how there's a lot of stress on particular staff in those centers to hold it all, but it should be something that is held by all of us. And so offering kind of these spaces and these moments of community, of connection, of seeing yourself, I think gives them the space and the opportunity to feel cared for, and then also be inspired. So I think offering kind of different kinds of ways of seeing people be in community, of people build together is really powerful. I love anime. I've been saying this about like My Hero Academia. It's a space where there's like the chosen one, but not really quite the chosen one. The way that they get through things, the way that they work together and, you know, beat the bad guys is by community, is by calling on other people's skills and abilities. And so really kind of offering the spaces for folks to be seen and held in who they are and honored, and then offering them ways to build community, to understand their skills and figure out how they want to utilize that. I don't tell all my students that they all need to go into nonprofit work. I don't tell them they all have to go into like higher education. What I'm hoping to train them in is to help them critically think and to help them honor themselves in their communities and find the ways that they can utilize their passions, their skills. And if that just means, you know, being really aware and being a really awesome proponent of equity in your engineering firm where you're doing your engineering, but, you know, you care a lot about what's happening in HR. You're pushing, you're managing up, you're managing down. That's something that I think is really important. And so offering these kinds of ways that, you know, where there's utopias and we kind of see where people have posited how they could have gotten there, or spaces where we're talking about kind of just like individual community issues and seeing the way that people wrap around and attack those issues is really powerful.
Great. Well, and I'm gonna add a twist to the next question as well, because it's also about making sure the students and other staff know who you are, right? And know who your identities, the identities you bring and the work that you have. So I was gonna ask how you utilize geek or nerd culture to connect with students or build bridges, but I'm also gonna throw in, what do you have in your office that signals who you are? Because I think one of the things that I love about Comic-Con are the artists, right? And I'm gonna toss this to Alex and then hopefully Martha as well. But Alex introduced me to an artist who I had seen before, but totally purchased new art for my office. So building bridges, but anything that you also have to show who you are in your office.
Absolutely. So my office looks like perhaps a teenager's bedroom a little bit, in that I have bunches of art and squishmallows and figurines and all sorts of stuff all over the place. I think one of the ways that I have been able to connect with students over time is actually by saying, hey, I present at Comic-Con. And I usually say it in the, I don't know if you've heard of Comic-Con. And most of them just roll their eyes at me like, yeah, we've heard of Comic-Con. We know what that is. And so we talk about fandoms that we might have in common or common interests in that way. And it's a lovely gateway. It's super easy. We've talked about this on lots of GeekEd panels. Like, you just want that gateway nerdiness. You know, it doesn't have to be the coolest, and there are all those sometimes acrimonious discussions that happen about it if you're a fan enough, right? We're just like, we don't care what it is. You like cats? Awesome. You like knitting? Fantastic. You want to play D&D? Beautiful. Like, whatever it is to help to find their connection, right? So that you can get to know a little bit more about them. And it was just funny, with the last question, I was just thinking, like, ironically, we play a lot of board games with my staff, and we currently have a 5,000-piece puzzle going for the summer where we'll have one-on-ones like around the table, and we'll work on pieces as we have our discussions. But one of the games we used to play was Pandemic. We really enjoyed that game. And once the pandemic happened, it wasn't so funny anymore. And so we honestly have not picked that game up again since then.
One of my sister's favorites. And
Right?
we're like, we can't do this anymore.
It's fantastic, but then you're just like, oh no, we see how this goes. It's not good. We don't want to get to the end of this. But I think that those kinds of connections really help us with students, especially students that are hard to reach because they're not feeling that they're either seeing themselves represented or they're just awkward. And particularly since the pandemic, students have come back without all of the skills that they would have had to develop over time interacting in person with people every day. And so, you know, we do that in little ways. And sometimes it's that you have a candy dish with interesting candy, right? Not just the stuff that you would get at Target, but maybe you're going to the Ranch 99 and you're finding stuff that speaks to other people a little bit more, and it's in your bowl, and people are like, oh. And I've had students who come in at first and they're like, can I just take a piece of candy? I'm like, sure. Hi, how are you? What's going on? And like, you talk to them, and then little by little, then they come in, they're like, oh, I'm just coming in to say hi. That's right. Yay. So I have found sort of the easy ways into communication, but it has been super helpful, and because those are topics that bring me joy as well, it makes the job a little bit more fun. And we talk about, there's so many different stories like Battlestar Galactica, the Avengers, that talk about when a bunch of the population goes away, or the snap as it is, and you're able to talk to people about how they're feeling in the moment by connecting it to a storyline that really means something to them.
Yeah, similar to, pretty much our offices are pretty close in what they might look like. I do have same thing, little plush toys, Funkos of all sorts in the office, a poster, little pictures, you name it. It does look like a teenager's bedroom probably, more so. But I feel in addition to students, it also sets a warm environment for staff. So even for folks who are coming in for a campus interview, so they're trying to get a job on campus, it's something that in addition to the questions that we're normally asking, that it also helps build that connection. So we'll end with our questions and things, but we'll start talking about, oh, I didn't know you liked this movie, or can you tell me a little bit more about that character that I don't know about? So I found that I've connected with folks there. With staff, same thing with our one-on-ones. It's been a way to connect, especially with myself being fairly new to the institution, and they're trying to get to know a little bit more about me. So going beyond the title and trying to get to know the person behind the title, I think is important. And through the different characters that live in my office with myself, that it is a good way to build those connections, to build some trust, and they get to know a little bit more about me and get some insight because of the characters that I choose to portray in the office, but also to get them to share what they like too. So then when I do bop over to their office, I get to see some of those characters there. I've also noticed that even when I have to have those difficult conversations with staff, that it's also been a really good way to end the conversation. So I've noticed that the staff member will be the one to then, okay, it's kind of awkward, we've had a tough conversation, but then they'll point out a character that I have. And we'll end the conversation with just chit-chatting about the movie, the episode, the character itself, but it's been a good segue to kind of end something that it may not have ended well, or may just have been a really tough conversation that needed to be held, but in a way that isn't bad for the next conversation, that wouldn't be so tough for them or intimidating for them to come back in. So I think in a way for staff, it's been a way to build trust, a way to get to know the people behind the title. And in addition, it's been a way for myself to also connect staff to staff. So I'm sure for folks who work in higher ed that it's been a lot of change, right, within our staffs, and a lot of new folks around. So some of the departments have changed in terms of staffing. So I've made connections once I hear a little bit more about what people are into, their fandoms and such, that I'll connect, oh, have you met so-and-so in this other department? Here's their email, connect, and I'll follow up with them to see if they've actually connected with them. And it's been a good way for them to also make friends across campus. So I think it's a good way also to build these connections and build the capital for our folks as well. So I think it goes beyond our students, which is really helpful. And again, just connecting us as humans, I think is really important. At the end of the day, I think within the positions that we have and the way that we can help the students, I think the staff at this time too really need a lot of support. And through the different fandoms, I think it's been a really good support for us and a good way to connect on something that's fairly universal and cuts across so many different communities. So I think that's another way for us to hopefully continue to elevate it. And also for some students who are saying, well, who is that? Or I've never seen so-and-so, to kind of remind them these are the classics, quote unquote, that they may not have been exposed to before.
Well, and connection is something I value, and I actually wrote my dissertation on how to connect students around geek culture on college campuses. And I love it when people say, well, I'm not a geek or I'm not a nerd. I was like, well, geeking out is also being really obsessed about something. So do you obsess about cooking? They're like, yeah, then you're a cooking geek, or a baking geek. And then people who like Broadway musicals, totally its own geek genre, right? So if you haven't recognized or realized, yes, we are a panel of women up here. We're also women of color. So there are often times when being a geek, we call out when our geek or our nerddom fandom goes awry. I think, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm really lucky that I have a lot of male identified allies, But there's also spaces where it's been women or people of color who are doing the calling out when there's some negativity or toxicity happening. So and this is free for all. So what are you disappointed in within fandom, and how have you reconciled this? Additionally, can any of you draw parallels to your work?
One thing I'll share. So I get pretty upset when there are inaccurate portrayals of mental illness in popular culture. I mean, furious. So hated Split. I don't know if anybody, it's just the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. It's just not an accurate portrayal, and perhaps that's the point, but it's portrayed as though that's what this person has. I also get really upset when there's things don't feel true, kind of going back to what I said about what I love about Wonder Woman. I did not like, oh gosh, now I'm blanking, the Scarlett Johansson.
Black Widow.
Black Widow. I did not, I'm so sorry, but I did not like it. For someone who had all these traumatic experiences, it's my husband's favorite word, my favorite word. There's just a lack of interiority for all that trauma. It really was more in favor of car crashes and helicopter and things that go boom. And so for me, the things that resonate for me are things that feel true, things that are accurate. WandaVision felt true, felt accurate about what happens when you're grieving a loss. Obviously, it's not accurate, but the sentiment, the emotion, the pacing, the whole world that you would create after having lost somebody felt very true to me. Similarly to Wakanda Forever, Shuri's grief, right? What she rejected, and then the pathway, and then coming to that. I mean, I lost it at the end of the movie. I was bawling in the theater, boo-hooing. Things that feel true are things that resonate with me. Things that feel false or inaccurate, that are harmful portrayals of mental illness, upset me. When you talk about committing suicide, right, that upsets me. That's not a sin that people commit or a crime that people commit. Maybe people complete a suicide or die by suicide. So language that is not, fair or kind upset me in popular culture.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think another one for that I think started out okay, but then didn't initially was She-Hulk. Comparing it to the Hulk, right, with body image and body type and what does it mean to be feminine? In essence, I think there was an opportunity there to really make it more inclusive where it has not. So I'm hopeful, but yeah, it's not looking that way.
Yeah.
I'll just jump in here because my son, who's in the audience, we'd have these passionate arguments about She-Hulk because he would say, "Mom, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible show," and I'd be like, "You just can't accept her because she's a woman superhero." And he's like, "No, it's not that. There's no story development. Why is she just a copy of, why can't she just be her own, have her own powers and be her own?" Anyway, so, but initially I couldn't accept the criticism because I'm like, hey, finally, here's a show that my daughter and I could watch and relate to certain moments. But, and it's funny, as you were talking, he just gives me a look like, "I told you so." Like, see?
Martha said.
But I've come to realize, yeah, it's not as complex as it could be,
right.
And it's a lost opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think about kind of just like cyclical moments where the most marginalized folks are the ones that are doing the majority of the work, but there's figureheads or particular folks, people that might be more palatable or to be the faces of things, and the way that those folks experiences their work, those communities get subordinated. So I think about an example kind of like this is Iron Fist. I just did not like it at all. But I thought these female characters were so amazing, and I wanted to see the show continue for them. But for Iron Fist character, I was like, it's all dark because you can't actually see him do anything physically. But there's all these other amazing women of color that are like kicking ass. And I feel like you see that in a lot of spaces. You see that in politics, you see that in institutions of power, where other folks get passed up, or their voices get passed up or rolled over. And you see that a lot, I think, in fandom, whether it's even just in the creation of fandom, or who gets to talk on panels, who gets what questions in interviews. There's this consistent oppression that takes place, and things that like we as a culture or society, don't want to think about or think we've gotten over. And so I think it's those moments of uncomfortability where we need to push and claim spaces. Black can be really hard to do, and it's also sometimes hard to see in media, or they don't want to show those stories because, if they did, what happened? I think about what if Misha Green had gotten the chance to do a second season of Lovecraft Country, where she was talking about like, what would it be like if things are seceding and like changing? I was like, oh my God, that'd be so great. Also, like, my undergrad is in history, and so like historical accuracy is a big thing, like period, forever. So historical accuracy in media and stories, but then also just historical accuracy in life, because there's true and there's facts, and that seems to be contentious nowadays for some reason.
Yeah, I think that there's so much in there that in the shows that we watch, that I often am glad now that I do a lot of the watching at home, because I tend to talk to the TV and I'm like, are you serious? Is that happening right now? Like, what's going on there? But a couple of the examples that come to mind are like the second Wonder Woman movie, and where's Al?
Yeah,
He's over here. So, we've had the DC Marvel discussion for years. I tend to be more of a Marvel person, but I could totally get behind the first Wonder Woman movie. The second one, I was like, what is happening? Like, what is she doing? Where is her focus? And so I had issues with that. But then also in the Marvels, like Black Widow is sort of a two-dimensional character, where I think some of the others get much better stories. And so that's irritating to me. And so at least if I'm at home, I can be like, seriously? Like, she's just gonna pop in, pop out? What? She's just sitting there and looking pretty? Like, she's doing big things. But we don't get to see a lot of that. And so those are the kinds of things that I find regularly irritating about a whole bunch of shows.
Yeah, and it's also thinking back to your own childhood, right? Because I'm a kid of the 80s, so I loved She-Ra and He-Man. I still have my She-Ra dolls from the 80s in a box in the Crystal Castle, so I was so excited with the reboot, and then I watched them like, this is fantastic. It is She-Ra for the now generation. I'm like, wow, that was so problematic what I was watching as a kid. But it really is important to have those conversations, even with yourself and friends. So I have a closing question, but I wanted to actually save some time to see if there is any questions from the audience for any of the panelists. Yes.
So you had talked earlier about modeling like community and how that's really important. You see a lot of community modeled in shows that are intended for children and comics, like Steven Universe. My Little Pony is a surprisingly great one. But when you see that modeled in stuff that's intended for like ages young adult through just like adult, a lot of the times I feel like, especially recently, it gets called out as childish. There was recently something on social media for Mission Impossible, where basically someone's like, I'm not leaving you behind, like you're my friend, which, intuitive and danger and stuff. And someone kind of was like, oh, what's this like Disney BS? How do you respond to that in like a classroom setting when you find that like kids or young adults picking up that kind of recent change in media that's, always there?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of it is thinking about like emotional intelligence, and also kind of thinking about like helping people reflect on their experiences. And so I do a lot of reflection questions, do a lot of check-ins, and I try to like intersperse, pieces of popular culture and things like that. And I really ask people like, what does it feel like to be supported? If you're thinking about, you say you're interested in engaging in our local community, you want to be out there volunteering and working with youth, you're not going to be doing that by yourself. One, because you can't legally, but Two, it's about being a team. Like, you can't be the person that's there every, from 3:30 to 6 o'clock every day of the week. You have to be communicating with your other team members about, the students you're working with and what you're working on. Thinking about, what was supportive for you? And like asking them, what are the communities? I'm not talking about just one person, but what has been the ecosystem? And so being able to give them some moments to like call back, to be able to understand, that there's power in connection. I deal with a lot of students that are very much in this space of like, they have to be the presidents of things. They have to be the people that are innovating and being entrepreneurs and doing upon. And it's a lot of work to kind of chip away at that. But it's a moment to think about, what are you watching now? Like, where's the connections now? Like, there's all these movies and shows, I think, like on Netflix, where you're seeing, Never Have I Ever. You have these moments where there's like actual communities, where there's friend groups. One of my favorite shows ever that I think kind of gets students as community. And so thinking about like, this is a group of like wild, very different folks. And the way that they're able to come together, even though it's like weird and crazy, their community college doesn't make sense at all, they're able to build together. They're able to like get to the end of 6 seasons and graduate and find their paths. And so oftentimes it's calling back, and sometimes also breaking some of those moments of I'm too cool. Is that a little bit helpful? Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
I mean, ChatGPT is about to get a lot of people into a lot of trouble. I'm just going to say that, and I think right now, over the summer, people are planning on trying to figure out, what's in your syllabus, and, is it clear that you can't just pull from the web? I've used it to kind of think about some quotes for a speech here and there, but if you just go on what you've been given, it's wrong. Sometimes it's sexist, sometimes it is just like they just make up, the program just makes up stuff sometimes. So I do think, I really do see that as if you don't educate students about how to discern, I'm raising a 13-year-old, if we're not telling him how to discern what's real from what isn't real, it's going to be a whole generation of kids finding themselves out of college. So I'm concerned about that. I'm very excited about technology for folks with disabilities. So we, first it was kind of text to speech, speech to text. It was, now we have telepresence robots that we're using for the Disability Services Center. So if you are in the hospital, there's a robot in class that's alternating and picking up sounds, and it's like you're there. And I think we innovated a lot during the pandemic, and that's not unusual anymore. Students expect it. I've been really excited about, nobody knew what the word autoimmunity was, right, 3 years ago, and now everybody understands that we have to be sensitive for folks with autoimmune issues and ways of engaging with the classroom in ways that protect each other. So I've been really excited about technology that innovates and that you can be in class if you have a disability without physically having to be in class.
I just signed my first sanction letter for a student for GP chat. So, and I know that there are a lot more coming. What I'm excited about, and there was a department on my campus working on it, but if we could scale it, it would be amazing. But a 3-dimensional version of Zoom. And so I think we know that hybrid workplace, being able to participate without physically being present is in the future. And so if we can figure out, all the engineers out there, how do we bring that virtual reality to real life, to education, to school, to work, so that we can have the best minds, the talent, people who want to be part of an organization but don't want to relocate to a certain place, right? So I know at Berkeley, it's very expensive to live there. We have a housing shortage. People don't always necessarily want to remove themselves from their families or communities in different parts of the country. And so I hope that's around while I'm still working, or that there are folks who can develop that to a mass scale. That would be nice.
Yeah, I think like accessibility is a big thing. I think for a lot of the folks I work with, and I hold like these dual populations of students and of community, and they're both super important. And occasionally, it'll seesaw, but being able to think about like hybrid ways of engaging, of different ways of being able to connect with communities, whether it's communities locally or like across the country, of being able to connect folks and have conversations. Students are really used to Zoom now. Sometimes they prefer it. And oftentimes, like, even if they're sick, like, I would prefer, like, if you still need to have the meeting, let's have the meeting on Zoom. You don't have to come in. I think there's also that piece of like self-care, of being able to find alternate ways of engaging, because I think they oftentimes will push themselves, or they'll be like, overextending themselves, and these kinds of things can give a little more grace, a lot more space for collaboration, in really powerful ways that, having to come all the way to campus, or like there's like, you can't park anywhere, like it's a lot of stuff. But it can build community, it can, connect communities. I am, though, concerned sometimes when we think about, what can be extractive.
In the last 5 minutes, so I want to rapid fire here.
Oh boy.
Higher education historically was a place for not us. Mm-hmm. There are many, even as administrators and in student affairs, student life, we step into spaces that are male dominated. So is there anything, a quote, a mantra, a character, superpower that you draw upon when you have to enter those spaces? Because often as women leaders, we have to prove ourselves in different ways. So that's what I want to close on. Surprised I didn't know this was coming.
Well, I'm just waiting for someone to invent like a approximately 50-year-old female superhero, preferably black, who doesn't give, okay, so who doesn't really care. I resonate with Sunny a lot. Like as I get closer to 50, it is what it is. And I just don't have any tolerance for BS. And so I'm maybe not answering your question.
No,
but
that's great.
I'm really waiting for something that I can really connect to and relate to. But as far as kind of what I'm drawing inspiration from and like what I like and what I'm into, I mean, I love what we do in the shadows. I was really happy to kind of go to the panel, and I got a T-shirt for Colin. Again, it just feels real to me, and it's hilarious, and it's subtle, and it's just my sense of humor, exactly. And I love to laugh at work. Every day I get to laugh is a good day. I really try to make that kind of environment for folks at work. So that's some of the things that I take with me, just what's making me laugh today? How can I use that in my work? But I want a 50-year-old black female superhero that I can.
I'll continue with the laughter sequence. I would go back to focusing on the non-human, so I really channel in my best Rocket Raccoon as being a leader, a little sassy when needed with the comebacks and things, but knowing how to lead, being creative in what we have to work with, and how do we make that work for our staff, obviously for the students, because that's why we're here, to serve the students, but really having fun along the way. So there's ways to get a tough job done, saving the galaxy, in this case, helping the student, and how do we do that with a team that's made up of folks from all over the place, that we come together as a team. We each have some strengths to share to go with our mission, but yeah, I'd say the raccoon is what I channel.
Thanks, Martha.
So Ming-Na Wen was 50 when she started Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She's 62 now. Amazing, right? So my current, I'm complete fangirl of Denegre, and who plays Michonne in Walking Dead. I relate everything in life to Walking Dead. And I think of just her katana, her big sword that she has, she carries on her back, and just in every place of danger, she just like busts it out. And I think about like having an invisible one as I go into these meetings where I'm often the only one of this or only one of that. And usually when folks meet me initially, there's that, if I don't share my title, there's that underestimation, right? And you can tell a lot about people when you meet them, and then they learn about your position later, right? So I usually don't lead with my title because I want to know, how are you going to treat me? Usually it's invisible. But yeah, Michonne is amazing in all her characters, but yeah, particularly in Michonne, just the way that she deals with grief and how she reacts to the world. And I just wish that she was the main character instead of Rick Grimes, but they have their own spin-off coming next year.
Awesome. Thank you.
For me, I actually kind of stick with a lot with like music when it comes to kind of like arming myself. So I would say the theme for Pacific Rim is like one of my like favorite songs. Like when I was in grad school, we had to do this mastery exam that everybody was like dreading. I remember like walking from my office to the classroom and like listening to this song and getting like pumped up. My favorite song of all time is Dreams by Van Halen because it's the ending song of the Power Rangers movie. And like, I just like anime theme songs. Like those are the things where it's just like, there's this moment of victory or where you're like charging yourself up and like, you don't necessarily get that like in life the same way. Like you're not like I won the battle or I'm not a professional athlete or, you know, I'm not always a big performer. So like where are those moments that I can have that? And then one of my favorite shows of all time that I always go back to is A Different World. And like that is something that inspired me to think about like education in just like this really wonderful way. And Jennifer Lewis plays a couple different characters, but my favorite is Dean Davenport. And like she's hilarious, but she's strong. And like she always like talk about like when she's engaging with her students, she's, you know, it's like tough but good love. And so she always talking about like, you're on my list. And so like I would be interested in trying, you know, I don't know what my slogan would be, but like that's something to think of for the future.
Awesome. And Alex, close us out.
Okay. I don't necessarily take from characters and think about how I put that into being, although I've recently come into Star Trek Discovery, and I really like Michael Burnham's character and the struggle, right, between mind and heart and how you put that all together. But generally when I'm in spaces, I think if anything, I'm channeling Buffy, the end of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is, you know, where there are many Slayers, not just one. Because if and I've been in plenty of spaces where I am just one, but I don't want to be. So generally when I'm going into a space, I'm figuring out where the other Slayers are and how we can get it together to move ourselves forward.
That was a perfect way to end our panel. And let's hope The Marvels is a good movie. So thank you all.